Baptists have their choirs, Episcopalians and Anglicans have their organs. Great introduction. Thank you, Rory. So I'm going to talk about something this summer. It's a good day to do that, I think. When I was a kid, some of you may remember this. When I was a kid, we had someone called the Good Humor Man. And if you remember that, he would drive this white truck and had good humor in blue on the side. And it was kind of an open-ended front cab. So if it rained, the Good Humor Man was not coming out. But other than that, he would come, and I spent my summers at the town camp and across the street in the park from my parents' house. And come a few weeks, school was great to get out of school, but after a few weeks, there's only so much dodgeball and softball and four-square thing and hopscotch and all the things that we did as kids. These are activities that you can explain to your children later. They probably don't know that. It was before cell phones were invented, just so that they understand. A computer did not do what it does today. So when the Good Humor Man would come to the park, and you would hear the bells, you hear the chime that the Good Humor Man, not like now where they come in the box truck and they have that song that just plays over and over again. No, the bells, it was like angels from on high. You'd hear the chime, right? And you'd listen, you'd stop, and everybody would ask, is that the Good Humor Man? That was the question of the afternoon on a hot August day. And we'd be like, I think so. Did you hear him? And another minute or two later, you'd hear it again. He's like, but is he coming for us today? Is he going to come and be with us and arrive in the park? And you kind of listen, like, okay, yep, no, he's over on Webbs Hill Road, and maybe he's going to go, he's up on Chestnut Hill Lane. No, that means he hasn't passed us, so he's definitely coming to us. And lo and behold, when the white truck would make its way into the parking lot in the park, it was an amazement. It was the best thing that could happen in a very boring day at the park when it was just too hot to do anything else. And so the Good Humor Man would get out of the truck, and this Good Humor Man was pretty quiet. He'd have his little silver change thing hooked into his belt, and you'd have your $1.25, and you could get your chocolate eclair or your rocket popsicle thing, or you get your Italian ice, and you'd stand in line, and we'd all queue up for some reason, we knew, because if you didn't queue up, if you were just a mob and you upset the Good Humor Man, he might not come back for a week. I mean, this was like, we're going to be on our best behavior all day. So and then amazing, he would open up the latch to the little freezer thing when it always would creak open as if it hadn't been oiled in a while, and you'd say whatever you wanted, and he'd just reach in and be like, here you go. And you'd be like, how did he know without looking where it was? Little did we know he had made 50 stops that day. He knew exactly where everything was. He put it in there. But so he would reach in and you'd hand, and you'd have that moment of joy, and you'd eat your ice cream or your Italian or your ice or whatever it was, and it would be just your reprieve from the summer heat, which you couldn't wait for winter. Right. So so we would all gather around and have this kind of moment of bliss go on, and then he would leave, and he'd be, goodbye, see you tomorrow. You'll be back, right? But he wouldn't say whether he would be coming back or not, because it might rain, and then he wouldn't be there. So in a way, that's a bit of what we encounter this morning in John's Gospel. So we'll do a little bit of a Bible study, if you will, for a minute or two here as we take a look at 1 John. And you can turn to your page there and see it and follow along with me. The prologue, which is what this is called, the prologue of John, the opening opening chapter of John and the opening verses of that chapter are a bit confusing at times. They kind of fold on each other. They're building. The author of John is building us and taking us on a story along the way, but kind of folds back and kind of repeats things as he goes along. And yet it's a bit mysterious, right? Because he starts, in the beginning was the Word. And we kind of say, okay, what beginning? This is the gospel. Where are we starting? And John, all the gospel writers, if you want to find something warm to do today, break open your New Testament and look at the beginning of each of the gospels. They all start in a different place. Now, John was the last gospel we think to be written. And interestingly enough, John, unlike the other gospel writers, decides to go in the beginning. So he's actually taking us back to the beginning of the Bible, to the opening verses in Genesis. And he says, in the beginning was the Word. And what does he mean by that? And if we read the beginning of Genesis, we know that God created through Word. God spoke. God said, let there be light. God said, and things were created. So John's being very insightful here by reaching all the way back into the beginning of Genesis. And he's saying, okay, yeah, I could say, yeah, the Word was with God because God created through the Word. But John wants to take the Word and not just stay there in Genesis, but as he goes along in there, and we kind of skip the portions that talk about John the Baptist, which kind of trip us up a little bit. But he said the Word was God, and in the beginning, the Word was in the beginning with God, and all things came into being through him. One of the amazing things about God is that God creates through spoken word. So God creates through a sense of order and reason. So we learn about God in this statement. But we also learn about Jesus. And Jesus is being tied here, that John is saying the spoken word of creation is who is to become Jesus, or is Jesus. Is that person who has become into the world in the manger, is the spoken creating force of the universe. Then we see that we move past John the Baptist, and then he was in the world, and the world came into being through him. We're talking, now we have it personified, beginning to have a gender. So we've moved from the word, logos in Greek is a masculine word, but still, it's now personified that John is taking us to this place of a personhood. He was in the world. Who is the he? It's not John the Baptist, it's Jesus that he's now talking about. And the world came into being through whom? John's making a big statement there. The world came into being through Jesus. And yet the world did not know him. It's kind of like the good humor man, He brings us joy in the summer, but we don't know where he's from and who he is. He's this mystery person who comes and just gives us the blessing of ice cream in the summer. He came to what was his own, and his own didn't know him. The mystery of the divine is that Jesus comes and is with us, and we don't take it so far to say that this is some sort of kind of, well, the Israelites didn't, or the Jewish people didn't understand him, because in truth the disciples didn't know who Jesus was. The disciples it was unclear to them. We see Peter getting tripped up all the time trying to understand who Jesus is. So everyone really didn't know who Jesus was. And then we said the Word became flesh and lived among us. I think of that, the good humor man. He became, yes, the joy of ice cream in the middle of summer on a boring afternoon. He arrived in the white truck. And so we have this sense of grace and truth of coming into the world at that point. It is God's offer to us through Jesus to be offered grace and truth in the world. So as we want to pull this together, and we can spend much more time on John and the prologue here, is what we want to see here, and what John is driving us towards is the sense of believing in God, believing in Jesus, and then seeing who Jesus is. For me, I learned who the good humor man was. Many years later, I was at my wife's, Lainey and I were at one of her aunt's house, and and we were visiting with her cousins and her grandmother and her aunt, and one of her cousins, her only female cousin, she walked in with her family. And who walked in with her? The good humor man walked in. My wife's cousin married the good humor man. This was a divine revelation in my life. And I looked at him. And he didn't know who I was. I mean, why would the good humor man know any of his people that he serves? Years later. But I knew. I looked at him and I was like, oh my God, that's the good humor man who went to law school and had 4 kids. And so I said to him, Tom, nice to meet you. And I just look at him, I'm like, you were the good humor man, weren't you? And he's kind of sheepishly and embarrassed. Yes, I was. And in a sense, right, that's us when we believing in Jesus. And kind of say, that it opens now and we can see and understand and know at a deeper level God and Jesus. When we can recognize that. And it's that sense of believing in God and stepping forward in that moment. And then we begin to see the Word has become flesh, has dwelt among us to bring us great grace and truth, to bring us to God in a way that we wouldn't understand otherwise. So that'd be good for you to keep with you and keep you warm on a cold day like today. Amen.